Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be chatting about Canada being called the most infiltrated nation in the Western world, to revelations about Jeffrey Epstein's role as a shadowy fixer for covert power networks. We'll talk about why the Crown is now seeking up to 8-year prison sentences for Freedom Convoy organizers, and why Canada's housing market is flashing warning signs not seen since the 90s crash. We'll also take a look at about how the Liberal Public Safety Minister backed an immigration case tied to a designated terror group, and unpack Prime Minister Mark Carney's sprawling web of financial conflicts. All right, let's get into it. So, first off, we've got Canada, the most infiltrated country in the Western world. Canada was once a safe haven for those escaping authoritarian regimes, but today it's increasingly viewed as the Western world's most deeply infiltrated country, especially by agents of the Iranian regime. 13 years after Canada shut down Tehran's embassy, the Islamic Republic still operates covertly on Canadian soil. Iranian dissidents face threats, surveillance, smear campaigns, and even assassination attempts. Intelligence officials linked to human rights abuses continue to enter Canada freely, while regime proxies use cyber attacks, money laundering, and community infiltration to advance Tehran's interests. Even Canadian elections are vulnerable, with foreign-linked disinformation campaigns targeting political candidates. Despite warnings from CSIS and documented death threats, the government's response remains tepid. Through leniency and misplaced multiculturalism, Canada has opened its doors not just to the oppressed, but also to those who oppress. So, what risks do these infiltration tactics pose to Canada's democracy and national security?
I mean, I think a better question is, what don't they risk? Realistically, right? So, with respect to Canada's democracy and national security, right? So, we know that they're infiltrating the nation in a lot of ways, and we know that they've compromised our elections. We know Iran is one of those specific groups that has been doing this. Now, you got to ask yourself, how can you pretend that you're a country that's going to give safe haven to a group of people that are persecuted in a country, then let the very same people that persecuted them in the nation? And it's what's interesting to me is they go, well, we're going to pull away their embassy. So it's performative, right? Well, we're going to do the right thing, but we're going to continue to let them in. So then you got to ask yourself, who's really in control here? So when you talk about like democracy and national security, you kind of go, well, it must be completely compromised. The whole thing. You pick and choose whatever you want. If this is how they get to operate with impunity within our own borders after we performatively take away their embassy, then you got to ask yourself, how much control do they really have within our government and all the other sprawling organizations that are under that umbrella? So when you ask the question, what risks are involved here? It's kind of like, well, I think they get to pick and choose. I think they can go, well, that's a problem for us. Now we're going to address that, because I think Iran, I think China, I think Russia, well, maybe not Russia, definitely Iran and China, India, they're deeply embedded in our system. And I think that they've got access to open almost any door that they want whenever they please. So I literally think everything is compromised. It's just a matter of what is on fire at that point in time for that regime and what do they want to put out.
Yeah, that's so crazy that you see, right? You go back to the 2017 Trudeau tweet of, oh, we're going to take in all the Syrian refugees. Refugees from around the world are welcome here. And then can you imagine coming here and then just the same regimes that you fled are just like working out in gyms and stuff? I have somebody that I met recently who's married to an Iranian woman, and he was telling me that his wife doesn't even feel comfortable going to certain parts of Markham and like the Richmond Hill area, because she knows that certain Iranian regimes are there and they killed her uncle. Like the same people that were in charge of the bureaucracies in the law enforcement in Iran are just walking around there. And she's like, these people literally killed my uncle. Like, it doesn't feel safe going even to shopping around there and stuff. And, maybe whether you're an immediate threat, that's one thing or not, but still just the discomfort of that being the situation. What's interesting is I think this is a constant. So I think about it very similarly to the sense where foreign infiltration isn't a on or off thing. It's not a switch that you can just take on. It's a spectrum that you can. It's always going to be there, but to what degree are you allowing it to fester? That's the big question.
See, I see it almost in a way where I look at it as like this parallel economy that's always operating because we can't seem to stop it, especially with China in particular. So they have their own police station, do whatever the hell they want here. So there's always this parallel regime operating, multiple parallel regimes operating alongside. Then it's just a matter of how much do they cross over into our political sphere. That's kind of how I see it. I think it's issue by issue they go in and go out.
It was really interesting too, because I read a book recently that was recommended to me by a buddy of mine, and it's called The Ghosts of the Medak Pocket, and it's about the Yugoslavian wars in the 1990s, and mainly between Croatia and Serbia, and how Canada was acting as peacekeepers during that time, and they were supposed to essentially go in and monitor the ceasefire, get in between both conflict zones, and just essentially, keep the peace. But that did not happen at all, and they ended up getting into combat with the Croatians, and it turned into an utter shit show. But what I thought was really interesting about that is that this book talks kind of similarly about to what we're experiencing now, just on steroids today, was how even at that time, Croatian community groups were fundraising in Canada to Croatian Canadians, saying, hey, chip in, there's the war back home, people, humanitarian efforts, we need to give money to this. They were lobbying our politicians to put certain policies and make certain plays. And then when it got found out that a lot of the money that was being fundraised here ended up being used for Croatian arms dealers.
Yes.
And so, it goes to the government, and then the government obviously just buys more weapons. They're like, we don't care about food for the starving people, which is crazy. But
who are then fighting Canadians, like you said, on the ground.
So you're like, they're literally fundraising the weapons that we're fighting them. You're just like, this can't happen.
I just feel like this country's so lost. I had this conversation earlier today, actually, with Megan. We were discussing multiculturalism. It is not a big strength. When you tell people to come to Canada and bring your culture, so why do most people leave their country? Now, I know there are a lot of reasons, but in a lot of cases, it's for opportunity or because there's problems back home. So they want to leave that behind, but you're actively telling them to bring it with them.
Yeah.
You're telling them, no, bring all that stuff here. Just onshore your problems to this country. And then you wonder why things are so upside down here, because you just let these things happen. Like you said, this is back in the 90s. We're saying, yeah, just come here and do your own thing, and you can just leverage our country any way you like. Don't worry about what we want. It's whatever you want. And then so they fundraise on our soil to fight our own people over there. It's fucking insane. And this has just been ongoing for I don't know how long. Maybe this is just woven into the cultural fabric of Canada at this point. But this is a big problem. When you tell people to come to our country and bring all of their shit with them, it just piles up and you have a bigger pile of shit. And that's exactly what I think has happened in this country. And this is why things like this, I just go, I think Canada's beyond repair in this particular sense. I don't think there's anything you can do about it. And like I said, I think these parallel regimes or these parallel sort of economies exist no matter what. And it's just a matter of how much they can sort of move the needle within national politics. That's
right. And that's the big thing for me is there's always going to be pressure on that needle. This is what I was talking about with the spectrum sides. But it's like, it seems like they have a lot of influence right now, especially when you look at certain, let's say the Chinese Communist Party influence in Canada. And to the point where, okay, yeah. And I was saying this to you as well in a, I can't remember if it was when we were on somebody else's podcast or on this podcast, but about how, okay, let's say you are a foreign regime, whether you're Iran, China, India, any of these sorts of things, and you want to hijack the Canadian election process. Well, you can put more and more people into certain select ridings, right?
Yes.
Like, okay, and you do see this is kind of how it goes is Ontario and Quebec end up taking the brunt of the immigration.
45% end up in Ontario.
But then you also look at who has the majority of the electorate representation in Canada.
Exactly.
It's Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah.
You need to win those two provinces to win the nation. And so you can start kind of seeing that in the incentive to go. And obviously there's some, you look at how our own government is using immigration as well. But it seems like it's very in tandem. If you know that they're gonna support one party, you can put them into very very key ridings and such.
You and I had this conversation. We broke it down into saying like 200,000 people in this country could control the country if they're in the right locations and vote the way you want, because everything's about swing ridings. It's the same thing in the United States. It comes down to a few 100,000 people. And it's just knowing how to position those people. And it's the same thing you saw with the Democrats with all the immigration in the US. It was the exact same thing. And trying to position them in swing states so they're no longer swing states. So then for another Republican win, you've got a massive uphill climb because you have to shift the narrative within entire states, which is very, very challenging. So it's the exact same thing. I think for them, what's interesting for like Iran and China is we just let them operate with impunity anyway. So for them, I think they'd have to decide and sort of pick and choose. Do I even care that much about the political wins? Because I can do whatever I want anyway. I can come here and we can arrest our own citizens. We can kill our own citizens and do whatever they want. So, I mean, for me, I'm not even sure how, and this is why I talked about the crossover a little bit, like how much incentive do these countries even have to even be involved in politics if they get to do whatever they want anyway, which is why I don't think Iran is as much in the political conversation.
Right.
For China, I think it's very important for a few reasons. One, their government is intertwined in everything, right? So whether it's organized crime, whether it's all their corporations, it doesn't really matter. So that's one aspect. The other thing is they're always worried about their reputation. It's such a weird thing. I don't think Iran gives a shit about their reputation. They're like, yeah, we cut people's heads off. Fucking deal with it. But China is like, no, we're perfect. And they don't tell anybody anything. So I think for them, there's a different kind of interest in infiltrating politics because I think it has to do with how they're represented on the global stage. Whereas Iran goes, oh, we can do whatever we want anyway. So that's why I don't think they're quite as embedded, but they may be as prominent in our communities.
It's interesting, too, as to where the loyalty of the diaspora communities lie as well, because a lot of Iranians hate the Iranian regime. Like they don't have a lot of support there. And it's a little different with, say, India or China in that respect. People have a little bit more patriotism and are maybe a little bit more easily influenced as to, well, and this is interesting because even this goes to how intelligence operations work, because I've even heard I can't remember the guy's name, the CIA guy that's been I'd imagine he's a plant. He says he doesn't work for the CIA anymore, but I feel like
I think they
curly hair.
I think they gave him, not to hack on the guy too hard, I think he got let in, say there's 10 doors. I think he got let in the first door. I think he got enough information and then they cut him loose. Because there's a certain amount, like it's good to have some information out there about the CIA, but I don't think he really knows anything about what's really going on. Or he's more performative, is what I see.
What I've long wondered, and I don't know, I'd have to actually talk to him probably both on and off camera to get a better idea. But I've always thought too, well, maybe you're still an asset, but your operation is to go on podcast and essentially say, here's the things you're allowed to confirm, and so that you kind of quell suspicions. We're gonna be like, oh yeah, they do this, and this, but then make sure that you try to debunk this because this is what we're really worried about getting out. Yeah. So give them a little bit to kind of please them and shut them up, but then don't dispel the big stuff.
Well, I think no matter what, that's actually what's happening. It's whether or not he still works for the CIA or not.
Right.
I agree. They're letting him say what he says. I don't think he does. Maybe he does. I think that's kind of the one thing that's up in the air.
But one thing that he pointed out when he was talking about getting assets to spy in foreign countries is that they would target Americans with a large sense of patriotism. Because then you can say, hey, let's say it's an American that went and now works in Germany or India or wherever, and you want to get the information or the access that person has, well, then you can kind of go to them and start being like, well, it's your duty as a countryman to America. And you see a lot of the same thing. They do the exact same thing. Israel does it to Israeli citizens in foreign nations. China does it, the Chinese Communist Party. And so it's really just a strategy essentially in geopolitics, to weaponize these community groups and these diaspora communities. But I wonder if in the regard to Iran, whether it's maybe not as effective because their diaspora communities don't respect the regime.
I agree. I think they do it with a more forceful hand, but I think in Canada, we just let them do whatever they want, which is ultimately the bigger problem.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the fixer in the shadows. Epstein arms dealers in the machinery of covert power. The official story paints Jeffrey Epstein as a disgraced financier and predator. The darker theory is that he ran a sex trafficking ring for the global elite. But what if both stories are missing the bigger truth? Before his crimes made headlines, Epstein was moving through the shadowy world of arms dealers, intelligence operatives, and covert financiers. He was mentored by Sir Douglas Leese, linked to the Iran-Contra affair, and introduced Ponzi schemer Stephen Hoffenberg, who later called Epstein the architect of his $475 million fraud. Epstein also had ties to Adnan Khashoggi, the infamous Saudi arms dealer and CIA middleman. These weren't just clients, they were key figures in covert Western operations. The evidence suggests Epstein may have been a fixer, laundering money, compromising targets, and keeping secrets for intelligence agencies. His role might have gone far beyond exploitation. He may have been a tool of geopolitical power. So why have these intelligence and arms dealings connections received so little media scrutiny?
Well, I think ultimately these people are able to hide in the shadows, and when one guy gets outed, they're going to do whatever they can to stain him and keep themselves, covert. I think that's the whole purpose of their operation. And you think about, like, why isn't it in the media? I think you can follow the chain in the media, right? So we were having a conversation with Sam earlier. There's really only 6 to 10 organizations that control the media outlets in the West, in America, Canada. There's really not that many, and governments are deeply, deeply intertwined here. And when you're doing something like this, you talk about arms deals. I mean, countries go to war. They're probably the biggest purchasers of weapons from these said arms dealers, right? So I'm of the mind that they're all sort of in one way or another in on this together. They don't all have all the information, for sure. They have small pieces of it, but there's sort of overlapping interests all the way around the circle, right? And certainly you have people that are more in the eye of the storm, maybe a Jeffrey Epstein or something like that, that see and have, control or relationships with the people at every angle. For sure, I can totally see that. But I think ultimately these organizations they survive because of mutual interest, right? So whether it's corporate, whether it's publicly traded funds, whether it's, government, whether it's arms dealers, whether it's, setting up these sex trafficking rings so you can honeypot people and then have leverage over them. I think it's just this massive puzzle that's just kind of always moving and shifting and sort of changing its face a little bit. But it's so massive and so intertwined, and there's just so many mutual interests. There's no way to take these things down. I think that it is ultimately gasoline that runs the engine of the world. That's how I think a lot of this stuff works. So when one guy gets targeted and shut down, I mean, even look what you're seeing right now with Trump. It doesn't make any sense that he's saying what he's saying right now. It doesn't. People can hypothesize for whatever reason they want. People can say, the easy one is, he's the guy on the list. He's in there for sure. Okay, maybe he is. But if he was definitely in there, why would he even at any point in time promote the fact that he was going to expose the list? Why wouldn't he just say, I don't know anything about that? I don't know. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Why wouldn't that be his narrative the whole time? So I'm of the mind that it's a much larger web that is interconnected with a lot more things. That's what makes a lot more sense to me. And that's why you don't see these things in the media, because there's too many interests. And ultimately, the people that control the media are government and those interests. That's why.
I've started to view the reason that we're not getting the list as much because of the fact that it would uncover a lot of American operations, not just, and even Israeli operations. Epstein also had ties to the British. I mean, Sir Douglas Leese was one of his mentors, who was a British guy. So he kind of ran in these Western intelligence circles. But I think the reason is that you would see not just that if his dealings came out, that certain elected officials and businessmen and all this kind of stuff would be implicated as creeps, which I definitely think they would, but that you would also, something much larger, which is, the entire country. Like, it wouldn't just be a stain on these individuals. Right. It would be a stain on how the country operates, like how the Iran-Contra
these
affair.
Things are interconnected, right?
Right. And so you look at the people that he was first kind of coming onto the scene with. Yeah, Sir Douglas Leese, Stephen Hoffenberg, Adnan Khashoggi, and a lot of these guys were tied into the arms dealing campaigns. So you even think about it, okay, he gets the title of financier. Well, if you're a nation, if you're America and you want to overthrow, this is actually the Iran-Contra affair, is if they want to overthrow and arm certain rebel groups in Central America, in Nicaragua, then what they ended up doing was they sold arms to Iran on the black market. This was the Reagan administration. And they circumvented Congress because at that time, Iran, and still today, Iran was considered an enemy of the state. So you can't sell arms to enemies of the state. But they did it through black market channels with guys like Khashoggi, and then they took the profits from that, those black market profits of these arms deals, and gave that money to the Contra in Nicaragua in order to fund their regime change down there. And so you get all this black markets or black money kind of stuff. And you think about it, I think this is what Epstein was, is he's kind of that guy in every prison movie that he's the guy that can get you things. He's got connections to the warden, the infirmary. He knows all the rumors. He's the people coming in and out, bringing stuff in. He can get you something from the outside if you need to. And so I see likely what happened here was that you've got guys like Epstein that, okay, they've got business fronts, like legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate fronts where the American establishment goes, okay, we can give money to this business or this kind of thing that you're doing. This is all above board. Then once it gets into that Epstein's hands on a legitimate operation, then all of a sudden his business starts putting it into, okay, now it goes down to the Cayman Islands or Bahamas or any of these tax havens. It goes dark from there. Then he can make it appear in a place like Iran or whatever.
Right.
And two, when you're dealing with these, when you look at the long history of intelligence operations and when they're doing these kinds of things, like, okay, you need to smuggle arms across a border, or like, who are you going to use? It's organized crime.
Yes.
So you have all of these guys that act as essentially middlemen that, okay, I, the American representative, can't be seen having an email chain with organized crime in the Middle East, right? So you've got the proxy, which is Epstein. And so I think that if we were to ever get the full picture of the Epstein saga, I think what we would realize is that there is probably about, I would just estimate somewhere in the neighborhood of like 100 to 200 more people that are just like him on the planet that are serving very similar means as far as just middlemen that are in these rings of power.
That makes sense. Which is again why you're not going to see any of this stuff come to light. But it is interesting to see it like that. Like, it's one of the things that I hope society can take from it, and maybe only a few of us, a few people, like people that listen to this kind of stuff, people that kind of operate in this world, is to understand how the world operates. You're not going to get all the information, but it is good to be able to pull back the curtain and see how things, how all this fits together. Like, that was one of the things that we got from COVID. The curtain was pulled back. We saw how the government operated at a much deeper level. Now you and I report on it constantly. Like people like us, like, we're truth seekers. We want the information. I kind of want to know what's going on because I feel like ignorance is the worst position to be in. And I can't always do anything about it, but it is, again, better to understand how the world around you operates. You can, educate the upcoming generation. And then maybe not with something like this, but in a lot of these cases, you can kind of move the needle in the right direction. So at least there is that. And you also get a better understanding of why this information doesn't come out, and you should still hate that it doesn't, and you should still be upset that it doesn't, but it helps you sort of like know the unknown a little bit. Yeah, you don't get to know all the information, but you get to know why. You know what I mean? And I feel like that it puts things to rest a little better. You know what I mean? Because for me, I like answers. I'm not an overly curious person, but when something like this is sitting, I kind of want to know what the hell is going on. I want to know how this all works, because I don't like that there are elected representatives that we choose to put into office and they can do these things. I don't like that they get to make those decisions, because it does feel like very two-tiered.
Well, I think to steelman their position and to give the devil his due, I think I can see the argument as to we need a certain amount of things that we can do in the dark. Like, even you look at that Argo movie, right, with Ben Affleck, about where they were getting the hostages or the Americans out of Iran during the big hostage crisis back, I think it was the 70s. You look at how they did that operation, which was that Ben Affleck's character is a CIA operative, and this is based on a true story. This is how they did it. They pretended like they were making a movie, and so the Ben Affleck character goes to Hollywood, gets a producer on board who knows what they're doing, gets a producer, gets a director, and says, we need to make a fake movie. And so they hire actors, they do press releases, they do all this kind of stuff. So they're lying to the American public saying we're making this movie called Argo. But then the reason they did that in this kind of whole black operation was that so they could go over to Iran, give the people that were hiding in the Canadian embassy fake passports and such, say, this person they're the director of photography, they're the screenwriter, this is the casting director, and we're scouting Iran for a movie operation. So they give them all of these documents, and then they just flew out of the main terminal. And so you can kind of see that, okay, yeah, maybe you do need a little bit of wiggle room.
Yes.
So that, because in the whole reason they were lying to the American public is, okay, well, now when the Iranian officials are checking our documents and we're trying to get out of here because they know that there is Americans trying to escape the country, well, okay, I need to be able to call this director I see on the internet. This guy's actually got credits. He actually works in Hollywood. Hey, are you working on this movie right now? Yes. And so you need this false front.
Yes.
And I wonder how many of these false fronts actually operate. Like, I mean, you saw there was the 60 Minutes episode with the Mossad agent who was sitting there in a mask and the voice alteration and all this kind of stuff. And he even said, he's like, the world is our stage.
Yes.
Like we have shell companies on shell companies, and you
name it. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. We can be involved.
That's how they did the whole pager thing, right? And so I think going back around to, I can understand in theory how you need a certain amount of wiggle room and a curtain to operate behind.
100%.
But my thing is that when it gets found out that you're not using that curtain to, say, save Americans on the other side of the world or people that are actually meaningful operations, but you're seen to be trafficking minors and you're working with pedophiles and all of this kind of stuff, well, now you're abusing your ability to operate behind the curtain. And that's when the hammer needs to come down. And that's why I am completely on board with, I don't care what it does to the Western establishment. Like, the truth about this needs to come out.
Yeah, I agree. I think the big problem is this. You need an area where you can operate where there's some darkness. I totally agree. But to do so, you need benevolence. Show me the last benevolent leader that we've had. And you are going to be, you're not going to be able to point to one because none of them are even alive. Mm-hmm. You have no decent people running the world anymore. So the problem is yes, you need it, but you also need benevolence, but nobody does that. So, it's like back to what do we talk about? Government efficiency, 20%. So 20% of the time they use their dark power for good. The other 80% is to pad their own pockets or to do shit like this. That's the problem with it.
Well, I don't even know if it's benevolence you need. It's that, because then you're expecting people to operate properly. It's that you need a big enough stick that when that people show that they're not actually benevolent, you need large enough repercussions so that people in the future on another operation, when they go, ooh, yeah, we're going to have to work with a child trafficker to make this operation happen, they might think twice about, oh, well, the last people that did this got hung.
Right.
And so you're not actually relying on their moral compass as much as their fear of consequence.
You need one or the other.
But when
you need one or the other. You need good people or you need bad consequences.
But when we're operating in this world where they go, oh yeah, the last guys that got caught doing this, nothing happened.
Actually, he's got his own island.
Yeah. What? It's just like, all right, well, now you're you
incentivize it versus like you said. So
all right, moving on to our next story. We've got Freedom Convoy. Crown seeks 7-year sentence for Litch, 8 years for Barber. Crown prosecutors are now seeking significantly longer prison sentences for Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Litch and Chris Barber, 7 and 8 years respectively, far exceeding the 2-year sentences previously indicated. The pair were found guilty of mischief and, in Barber's case, also of counseling others to disobey a court order. Their sentencing hearing is scheduled for July 23rd in Ottawa. A recent request from Barber's lawyer to halt proceedings based on allegedly misleading legal advice was denied, clearing the way for sentencing to proceed. The case remains a flashpoint in Canada's debate over pandemic protests, government overreach, and the criminal justice system. So are these sentencing demands politically motivated or proportionate to the crimes?
They're 100% politically motivated. Yeah. Look, first of all, the Emergencies Act, pulling it was illegal. So a lot of this stuff should be totally thrown out. And then second of all, when you get people that murder people, shoot at people, stab people, steal cars, steal other stuff, do diamond heists, do all this other shit, are illegally here, all this other stuff, and they all go to jail and then they get out the next day. And then they repeat it and literally get arrested the same day, do it again, get let out. Cocaine trafficking, no big deal. You can go back on the street. Fentanyl, we don't care. Go back on the street. But this, 7 or 8 years, 100% politically motivated. And I really hope that this ends up becoming like a house arrest or a 1 year or a time served or something like that sentence or nothing. Because if it does become a 7 or 8 year prison sentence, what that says to the Canadian people is if you push back against the government and we don't like it, we will 100% imprison. This is persecution. Not only is it a warning sign, it's an actual legal precedent. Very, very dangerous.
Well, you go back to an episode we did with, I can't remember whether it was our first or second episode with Sam Cooper, but we were discussing this topic. And he was mentioning that there was rumblings within the Canadian intelligence apparatus that the political class in Ottawa at the time of the Freedom Convoy wanted a Tiananmen Square, like their Tiananmen Square. Not to say that they wanted to slaughter thousands of innocent civilians like the CCP did back in the 70s, but what they wanted was that message. Like, no, we run things around here.
Our boot on your neck.
Yes. And so I think that they've seemingly been pretty successful in that so far. Again, this just goes to that why I think there needs to be consequences so much for especially things like the Emergencies Act. If you can invoke wartime measures to do whatever the hell you want, freeze bank accounts, all of this kind of stuff, and then it gets deemed that it was unconstitutional to do that. And none of these people that made this decision, I mean, hell, Mark Carney wrote an article lobbying for this, saying like, yeah, we should do this.
Mark Carney was behind a lot of this stuff and was involved in text messaging at the time to push this forward.
Mm-hmm.
Just so
he wrote an article on it.
Yeah.
And so the fact that, these people like Tamara Litch and Chris Barber are facing the brunt of that, like especially when you point out, is what's happening with our justice system. I don't even think it's a 2-tier justice system anymore. It's a multi-tier justice system, and everyday Canadians are at the bottom of that list.
Well, it's just being weaponized. So it's like, it's a broken justice system for people that actually need reform, like criminals. And otherwise, it's just used as a weapon against Canadians.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is.
Well,
dark.
And this is where we end up, the average Canadian ends up getting screwed in this scenario. Like, even, okay, have you noticed, have you got any of these? I've gotten like 3 in the last 4 or 5 months of the camera tickets, the automatic camera speeding tickets.
No, I've only had 1. I don't drive that fast.
There's zero leniency. I mean, it's kind of an unspoken rule that if you're going 15 kilometers over the speed limit, no cop is going to pull you over.
Yes,
I've always operated on that paradigm. Sorry, but in those cameras, they don't care.
No.
So all 3 of them, they were like, I was doing 55 and a 40. I wasn't like, it's like whatever. But there's just no sympathy at all from a machine. What I found interesting, though, is that there's a victim's charge on the bottom of it. So the tickets were $100, and then there's a victim surcharge, which is $20. And I was like, what the hell is this? So I looked into it. What's this program all about? Started Googling. What it is it's a government fund, kind of like how the vaccine response to this money is supposed to go to people that are the victims of vaccine injuries. Well, this fund is supposed to go to the victims of crime. So if you're home invasion, or if you got assaulted on the street or whatever, this is supposed to go to help pay for those victims. And I just look at this, I go, wait, so 20% of my ticket, so I've paid $60 into this fund over the last like 3 or 4 months through these 3 tickets, is for these victims. But then, you pair that back to the fact that the people that are perpetrating these crimes are going out the very next day. So me, the average Canadian, is subsidizing the victims that you're allowing out of the criminals that on the street. And like even just last week we saw, right, there was that guy. Have they caught that guy yet who stabbed the older lady? Did you see this story?
The 14-year-old kid? I think so, yeah.
Yeah, they did end up catching him. But he was out. Like, he had been released. And so that's somebody's life that is the consequence
This is happening too many times.
And then so just tying this back into the original story when it comes to somebody like Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, how is it that, you're putting this much public resources into trying them? This is also the longest mischief trial in Canadian history. Yes. Mischief is supposed to be very low down on the totem pole.
This was supposed to be no more than a 2-year sentence max.
Yeah.
And then they bumped it up. And I know because I did a bit of research on this. I knew it could actually get I know it could be significant if something bad happened to somebody, but nothing bad happened to anybody, right? So I'm a little surprised they bumped it up to 4x what it currently was, or pardon me, what it previously was. It's kind of insane.
Yeah, and this aggravates me a lot. And I think this is something that I think the Conservatives have done a very poor job about talking. They talk about crackdown on crime, but they need to deal with the fact that we've got a whole bunch of activist judges in there, because there should be, in this landscape, the judges shouldn't be sitting there going along with this sort of thing when,
it's insane. It's insane. It's insane when you exactly say what you just said. You let a 15 or 14-year-old back out on the street repeatedly for what he'd been doing. And this happens with adults that are above the age of majority. You let them back out, and then someone, because you know who does this? Pierre Poilievre posts about this all the time. Oh, this person was out on bail. This person was out on this, and they killed somebody, and they did this, and they killed their partner. And a lot of times you kind of go, they shouldn't be this soft on crime. How can you, as a judge, you always know what's going on with the community of sentencing within Canada. It's what you do for a living, right? You and I know what's going on in the news world. They get it, right? So you see this happening, and you still think that you can justify this. 100% activist judges. That's exactly what this is. And for me, again, if they get anything significant here, any Canadian that does not like how their government operates and would like to do something about it, get your shit packed up and do it from another country. Because if you don't do it at arm's length, now you know what's going to happen to you.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada's housing market is flashing 90s crash warning signs. Canada's housing market is flashing warning signs. According to new data, the sales to new listings ratio, or SNLR, fell to 49.3% in June, the weakest for that month since 1995, during Canada's worst housing crash. The drop isn't just steep, it's accelerating. While listings rose 8%, sales grew just 3.5%, signaling that supply is outpacing demand for the first time in years. This contradicts the popular narrative that Canada has a housing shortage caused by surging population growth. Despite record immigration levels, 1.2 million in 2023 and 1.3 million in 2024, buyer demand is evaporating. Why? Because Canadians can't afford to buy. With high interest rates, stagnant wages, and ballooning living costs, affordability is collapsing. The result is a market caught in paradox. More people, more homes listed, but fewer buyers. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's a market crisis fueled by flawed economic and immigration policies, and it may be setting the stage for another historic crash. So is the real issue a lack of supply or the lack of affordability?
So it's actually both, right? So the lack of supply has somewhat arbitrarily kept the housing prices higher, right? Even without the demand. So the affordability has now trumped the supply issue. So you can have a supply issue, and if you don't have an affordability issue, that's the only thing that will come into play. But because you have an affordability issue, it doesn't matter how many homes there are anymore. People can't afford to buy anything in this country. I say this all the time. It's one of the statistics I like to stick to. The average cost of living for a family of 4 is $8,000 more than the take-home income for the average family of 4. So no matter how much people want to buy homes in Canada, they just can't afford to. So this has ultimately become an affordability crisis. It's kind of like the lowest common denominator issue, right? It doesn't matter if you've got 1 million homes or 10 homes. If I've got no money, I can't buy any of those homes. And that's exactly the problem we're into right now in Canada. Now, the issue you have here is what happens when people keep listing their homes. So some people, well, they can sit on it. They don't care. A lot of people need to sell them because they can't afford them anymore. This is where you see that bubble burst. This is where you see that huge decline. So in the 90s, from 89 to 91, the Toronto market dropped 34% in those 2 years. Now, the rest of Canada from 89 to 96, adjusted for inflation, dropped 40%. So this is a huge crash over 7 years. Canadians had to dig in. This took a lot out of us. Now, that was charged for different reasons. That was an actual supply and demand issue more than anything else. This one, of course, has just been driven by bad government policy, primarily, right? Yes, a lot of people, but really people just can't afford to live here anymore. And what a lot of people don't know or won't see if they haven't paid enough attention to it is when the housing goes, like truly goes, it pretty much everything else goes. That's like the whole Jenga tower gets knocked over. The rest of your economy does fall apart, right? Because you see exactly what I'm saying is if you can't afford to pay your mortgage, you got to sell your home. If no one's buying your home, what do? Two things. You default or you drop the price. Because you have one of two choices. Do I want to cut off the arm or lose the whole body? So this is what's going to happen. In 2026, I think it's up to 60% of Canadians will be paying maybe, it might have been double the interest rates that they were paying on their homes previously, just because everyone had low interest rates through the pandemic, and now they're all catching up on that 5-year term. So there is a reckoning coming, within the next 6 months in this country, just due to the interest rates alone. So it's bad now, but it's going to get significantly worse because all these people that are listing their homes are going, oh shit, I'm running out of runway here. In 6 months, if I don't sell this home, I can't afford to live here. So then everything falls apart. I think we're in real trouble here. And in this particular case, it is more so the affordability, and the supply is its own problem. So even if you fix affordability, supply will again still be an issue, which is interesting because it kind of compounds the problem. But if you don't fix affordability, country burns to the ground.
I remember back in the pandemic days when the housing crisis first started. Well, when the housing craze first started going off, when people were paying out of like way over. I remember thinking I was crazy at the time because everyone was just acting as if it was normal for this like overbidding and stuff. And it's so great. The market's great right now. Well, I was sitting there going, what else in the world would you ever go, this is the value of something, but you're going to pay 30% more for it? Like, let's say this is the real value of this home is $500,000, but you're going to have to pay $800,000 for it if you want it. Like, I couldn't understand why, like, outside of housing, nobody would ever do that. They'd say that thing's worth $500,000. I'm not paying any more for it than $500,000 then. But all of a sudden, when it was housing, people are like, oh, yeah, all right, cool. I'll pay way more than it's worth. And then so what I see happening is those people that paid way more for what it's worth overextended themselves in a lot of scenarios as well. They actually were bidding more than they could afford as well. So it's not just that the thing was undervalued. It's that they also didn't have the money they really needed to buy the overpriced home.
Well, especially with the low interest rates,
right?
That once they bump up, they go, uh-oh.
Right.
And then the other thing you got to consider is this. What happens to all those people that can afford to keep their homes, but when you bought it at $1 million, now the market crashes, now it's only worth $750, but you owe $900 on it.
Right.
Now you have something called negative home equity. Fucking see you later.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is even if you don't get into the aspect of, say, it going completely into negative home equity, because let's say it does drop to that much, I could see more people being able to buy a home. But let's say 5 years ago, that house was $500,000. You paid $800,000 for it in 2022. And now we're sitting here in 2025 and you're trying to list it for $700,000. You're taking a $100,000 hit, but it's still being sold for more than it's actually worth.
Yes.
And it's just the reason that it's being sold for that is just because of the inflated money supply and inflated population as well. I also wonder how much of this is due to, because we talked here about how, 1.2 million people, 1.3 million people coming in per year. So that should mean more buyers. But if a large percentage of those are, say, temporary foreign workers or international students or just or temporary residency, you're not going to be buying a home. So that's 700, let's say, this is just an arbitrary number, but let's say it's 700. Actually, no, it would be about 800,000 of that 1.2, 1.3 million, but from immigration streams would be temporary people. So they're looking into the rental market. And then, so this is where you would see more and more people where you've got, let's say there's 10 people, 8 of them own no homes, and 2 of them own all the homes, and they rent it to the other 8. And it's like, this is where we're going more and more and more, where you have a few people or even institutional investors that have these assets that they rent out to just a growing population of people that can't afford or have no interest in buying a home.
So that's what you're seeing here, right? So corporate ownership of homes doubled from 2015 to 2025, 15% to 30%.
Wow.
And now we're doing a lot of things to incentivize more corporate ownership, even like the sixplex thing in Toronto. They made them 5 and 6 plexes. You know why? Because that qualifies as corporate, as a corporate loan, not a personal one. So that's now commercial real estate. Anything over 5 is commercial. So you're just incentivizing more corporate ownership, right? So you're going to continue to see this. Now, another thing that's interesting, I did this math a long time ago when this whole housing shortage thing started. And anybody can look this up. And I'm going to have the numbers off a little bit, but I know that there's a pretty significant surplus. So if you look at the average number of people that live in a home in Canada, it's 2.5. So if you take the entire population and divide it by 2.5, you'll actually have more homes than you would have that division, those families, let's call it. So we actually do have an adequate number of places to live. Now, people's argument, and I agree with them, is, well, yeah, but not in big cities where people want to be. I go, totally agreed. But when you have an affordability crisis, beggars can't be choosers. So what happens is people relocate to smaller towns, smaller cities, and whatever it is, just so they have a place to go and a place to live, especially if they're just renting. So you get into this situation where there is actually enough homes if you're desperate enough.
Right.
And that's, I think, where we've kind of landed right now, which is an interesting position to be in. So, it's the housing shortage thing was actually a little bit of hot air, a little bit of fluff. I think it was something that they created to try to stimulate the market that backfired on them. Because if you look at the number of homes per people here, United States, the UK, we're all pretty close, way closer than you would think, given the prevailing narrative here in Canada. It's just now what happened as it backfired is sure it stimulated the economy in the short term, but now it's hyperinflated the prices of homes and then created this issue that we're talking about where people overpaid. Now there's this correction, and now you're going to see this massive shift again. And I think it's inevitable. I think you're going to have a market crash here. Maybe not this year, but I think next year, no matter what, I think it's coming. I think you compound this issue with those rising interest rates, and they're not rising, but they're renewals for people that own homes. I think we're fucked. I think next year you're going to see this thing come toppling down.
What'll be really interesting is to see if they pull the lever that they shut off a couple of years ago, or at least, tried to slow down, which is foreign investment into real estate. I could see them starting to roll back a little bit of that and going, because again, it's going to be the large institutional investors and stuff that are, say, trying to sell homes that are going to have the most amount of sway in these policies. But I think that's a major piece of this housing problem in Canada that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, which is the money laundering of how our real estate. Even I have a buddy that, one of my close friends that works in one of the largest housing developers in a large city. He was saying it's an open secret, and like everybody knows that we're like, even houses that people will come in with duffel bags full of cash and for the down deposit and stuff. Like, we know that these are being used as money laundering, but it's good for sales. And so this is where you got into the Vancouver issue, especially, right, which is a hub for all of this kind of stuff, where housing costs or the price of houses went through the roof because you have an artificial demand, which is just a select few amount of people in organized crime groups that are buying in. And that's where they started introducing the taxes for empty properties and all of this kind of stuff. I wonder if things get bad enough, whether they're just going to, I think they put Band-Aids on that problem. I don't think they actually solved it, but I wonder if they'll take those Band-Aids off and just allow
100% they will, because you have one of two choices. While you're in power, you let the country fall apart, or you use foreign investment, because Canada's strength is our multiculturalism. And then we have a black box. Anytime a home gets purchased, wherever that money came from, that goes in a black box afterwards. You're not allowed to look into it, which is insane. It's just, you're basically saying, please come on with all your money laundering. We allow all that. It's not a problem. Buy real estate, and then we have no idea where your money came from, and we don't care. So they're definitely going to let them back into that market. Otherwise, it's going to come crashing down. I think it's going to crash anyway. I think that will be more hot air in the balloon, but it's an effective measure to buy yourself more time. Now, if I were Carney, what I would do is I would try to drive foreign investment from allies, not adversaries. We'll see how that shakes out, though. Before we move on to the next topic, this episode is brought to you by The Tallowed Truth. Would you ever eat your skincare? No. Then why put it on your skin, your body's biggest organ? Most skincare products are loaded with chemicals that absorb straight into your body. That hydrating cream might as well come with a hazard warning. Your skin needs real nourishment, not lab experiments. That's why I use F-Bomb from The Tallowed Truth, made from grass-fed, grass-finished tallow. It's also hormone-free, antibiotic-free, steroid-free, GMO-free, and even vaccine-free. Nothing artificial, nothing toxic, just results. I've been using F-Bomb from The Tallowed Truth for almost a year now, And honestly, I'm never going back. My skin feels hydrated. My fine lines are reducing and I just look better. Plus, I'm already 40. This shit's not going to get any easier for me. But what makes the Tallow Truth even better is that they're a freedom first brand that supports Blendr News and everything we stand for. They even offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you've got nothing to lose. So go to thetallowtruth.com/blender and use code BLENDR, BLENDR, for 15% off. This includes 15% off already discounted bundles too, so you can save as much as 40%. That's thetallowtruth.com/blender, code BLENDR at checkout for 15% off.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada's public safety minister backed man tied to terror group. Before becoming Canada's public safety minister, Gary Anandasangri.
Anandasangri.
What's funny is I had to learn that name with a Japanese accent. For some reason, it was easier to say. Anandasangri.
Sometimes, yeah, man, I get that.
Wrote 2 letters, one as recently as July 2023, urging immigration officials to reverse a deportation order for Senthuran
Selvakumaran.
Yep, nailed it. A man who, with confirmed ties to the Tamil Tigers, a listed terrorist organization in Canada. Selvakumaran admitted to working for the group for 6 years, distributing propaganda and receiving payment. Despite multiple credibility issues in past asylum claims, Anandasangri cited emotional hardship and family separation to justify his intervention. Just days later, he was appointed to cabinet, now overseeing the very agencies he once lobbied. Although Selvakumaran
is what it looks like.
This is an issue.
Although Selvakumaran has ultimately denied residency on national security grounds.
The case has raised serious concerns about Anandasangri's
Anandasangri's judgment.
Potential conflicts of interest and public trust. Critics argue it's unacceptable for a public safety minister to have previously advocated for someone deemed inadmissible on terrorism-related grounds, especially when that minister is now tasked with safeguarding Canada's national security. So is there a double standard in how Canadian authorities and politicians treat different forms of extremism?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is becoming more and more obvious too, right? Especially as our politicians, like our political group, becomes more diverse. I'm not necessarily saying that's bad. I think you should represent the people, and I think we become a very diverse country. So I don't have a problem with that. But when you do this, you sort of onshore all these different problems, and then you have to make allowances for them, right? Like you saw with Carney's conflicts of interest the other day. It's like there's 100 of them that he had to recuse himself from, I think was the last headline that I saw. So you look at that and you kind of go, okay, well, we have to make room for this guy's issues. No, you got to do it for everybody. The thing is, a lot of times these cultural issues are something that we will have a problem with as a nation. So the Tamil Tigers, you look and you go, well, they're a terrorist organization or Hamas or whatever it may be. But then you let these people into parliament, into government, which again, I don't have a big problem with, but then you onshore these problems. So how can you allow the leader of the country to be like, well, I have to recuse myself from these issues. That's not a big deal. And people go, yeah, okay, fine, no problem. But you wouldn't let this guy. At the end of the day, I have a problem with this. I have a problem with both of them, I'm being completely honest with you. But you look at this and you kind of go, well, you can't have 2 different sets of rules for people that are politicians. They can have a different set of rules for us, for sure, but not for them. So now you have to sort of make room for, well, this isn't extremism anymore because this guy's a public minister, so now we have to have an allowance for it. It's almost like this, it's the issue of inclusion. Like it's just gone way too far, in my opinion.
Well, I don't know. I do have an issue with this idea that, okay, you've got a public safety minister, like hilarious that a man, that he did have to recuse himself from dealings with anything related to Tamil Tigers because there's a potential conflict of interest there. And he was saying, don't worry, when he did that like 2 months ago, he was saying, don't worry, I'm just trying to get ahead of the curve here. It's really not an issue, but I'm just being proactive. And then now, this last week, we see that, he was actually lobbying for these people to get certified for immigration to come to Canada. That's a big conflict of interest. What I have an issue with is it's not people from different cultures or ethnicities or countries being in a place of public representation, but what are you representing? Because you see somebody like him who, well, it seems like he's saying, I'm here for the Sri Lankans in Canada. It's like, No. You represent Canadians.
Yes.
And if some of those happen to be Sri Lankans that have immigrated here, great. But you represent all Canadians.
Yes.
Or at least all Canadians within your constituency. But when you start being like, oh, I represent the Sikh community or I represent the Chinese community, this is where I see that exact issue that we were talking about in the early forms, where people, other governments in other sides of the world, where it's not even a people on the ground thing, they can start abusing that system like crazy. And I think actually this goes to, I know the policy that started causing all this mayhem. It was in the 1970s. It was Pierre Trudeau. He did the Multiculturalism Act, and that at that point, what happened was the government operating system for immigration to Canada before that was, okay, when you come here, we're going to have programs in place and kind of like the cultural ethos that we're going to try to help craft is that as you immigrate here, you become Canadian. Well, Trudeau came in and said, it's not fair. There's pretty much the same thing that Justin said decades later, which is there's no real such thing as an ideal or typical Canadian. So we should do away with this idea of essentially teaching people what it means to be Canadian. And instead, our policy program is now going to be teaching Canadians to respect other cultures. And so it completely flipped. The standard of citizenship went from people coming here, learning our ways and assimilating properly, to us having to adapt to them. And I mean, you know what? Like, it's funny because 10 years ago, I didn't really think about this kind of stuff in depth. But if that's your policy, you don't have a nation anymore. Like your nation's done.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly what you're seeing here. Like essentially, and this is a little hyperbolic, but in a sense, if the guy was representing a terrorist organization, in a sense, we now effectively have terrorists that are now a part of parliament and who are now ministers. That's how far multiculturalism has got this country. That's what that looks like. So this is the fundamental issue. Mm-hmm. This is actually a really big problem. And I guess you could say, well, he doesn't work for the organization. He was just lobbying for them, blah, blah. Sure. Like I said, I was being a little hyperbolic, but I'm trying to prove a point is we've become so inclusive and so multicultural that we now have terrorists, quote unquote, I understand it's hyperbolic, that are now running part of our government. Mm-hmm. This is insane. And we're not doing anything to stop it except making room for them. Being like, oh, you can just recuse yourself from this. Well, this is not extremism. Well, this isn't a problem. This is a problem. This is a problem. Like, we need to start changing these things up. We need a new set of rules to manage the world that we're in today so that shit like this doesn't keep happening.
Yeah, and I think that has to be a cultural shift. And, you know, on the other side, I do think it can go a little far sometimes, because I even do see it now as well, where you do kind of get this ultra nationalistic sense where, okay, you know, Canada needs to be a white population and this and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we need to just kick those people out. It's like, no, I don't go that far with it, but I do think, yeah, you need that cultural standard as being like, hey, everyone's welcome, but these are the rules of our house. Like, yes, we'd love to have you over, but it is our house.
A good way of looking at it is look at America, look at Canada. America was able to grow to a population of over 300 million people and still operate with some cohesion.
Right.
Whereas Canada couldn't even get to 40 million without the wheels falling off. And it's because there's different, we operated a different way. And, you know, there's this saying, well, in America, you're American first. I understand that may not be exactly how it is today or anymore, but that is kind of how it was down there. Like, you become American, you jump in and you join their culture, and they were very adamant about that. And that was something that was kind of woven into their culture. So when you're within their community, they will welcome you to be like them. That's what it is. And you still get to keep your culture. You're an American Italian, essentially. And I understand that it's somewhat arbitrary what I'm saying, but it's obviously made a very significant difference, because now in Canada, because of the policy and because of the sort of macro society view on this whole thing, this whole place is an absolute disaster. Back to even talking about Iranian regimes just operating here with impunity, you know, and now terrorists operating with as ministers in our parliament. That kind of shit is not happening down there. And it may be now, but I said they got to 300 million. When they got to 300 million, that kind of shit was not happening. So we just did a very, very poor job of scaling up, and it's all on bad government policy.
I think to cap this off, Theodore Roosevelt nailed this a long time ago. He said, in the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else. For it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming in every facet an American and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he is an American but something else also isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. And I think that kind of idea can, obviously he's talking about America, but I think that can be applied to us as well. And actually something that, he said with, we have one language here. I know we have two official languages in Canada. It's different, but I do see this being a very large issue, like even in the initial read, right? It's an issue if people can't pronounce the names of their elected leaders.
Yeah, we had a good time.
Yes, it's funny, it's comical.
Yes,
but this is kind of something that I pay attention to a lot philosophically, is language, whether it be Orwell, whether it be, actually there was another good book, The Power of Language. It's just a little essay, a philosophical essay. But people don't realize how important language is. It's actually what we use to craft shared reality. It's how you and I know that we're operating in the same space. I let you know what my intentions are, this and that. If we can't actually have a shared language, then we have no way to communicate with one another in terms of going forward. And so if you get to this point where you have a country which has, I even see it now where you'll see listings on Indeed and stuff, say in Brampton, where it's like requirement must speak Punjab. You go, if we've got it where, okay, to get a job in Brampton, you've got to speak Punjab. To get a job in Markham, you've got to speak Mandarin. I'm not saying, I haven't seen a posting with that.
I understand what you're saying.
And then you've got all these little enclaves within a country. Again, you don't have a country. And so I even see that being a very large issue.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think in a lot of ways the wheels are falling off here, bud. Sorry.
All right, last story for the day. We've got Democracy Watch saying Carney's ethics screen is a sham. Prime Minister Mark Carney's financial disclosure reveals deep and ongoing entanglements with industries his government directly regulates. His so-called blind trust contains over 400,000 stock options in Brookfield, worth more than $6.8 million, alongside shares in companies tied to clean energy, tech, pharmaceuticals, and defense. Many of these sectors are central to his political agenda, particularly Canada's transition to a clean energy superpower. Carney also maintains investments in global firms like Amazon, Moderna, Palantir, and Lockheed Martin. Despite the optics of ethical distance, watchdogs like Democracy Watch say the arrangement is not truly blind. Carney selected the trustee, set the rules, and can receive updates. Critics argue this isn't just a conflict of interest, but a form of institutionalized insider governance. With the Prime Minister financially linked to the outcomes of his own policies, questions of integrity, transparency, and democratic accountability are unavoidable, and Canadians deserve answers. So, should elected officials be required to fully divest from sectors they are actively regulating?
100%. Otherwise, you're just in there weaponizing the government apparatus to your own benefit. And the thing is, who would you be crazy not to if you controlled all this? And this blind trust thing is a joke. I love the fact that he gets to receive updates. First of all, you put everything into a blind trust 4 months ago. You know what's in there. And you give people a set of instructions. Here's your buy and sell numbers. Here's what's going on. That's how this works. And to pretend like he's not getting this information more regularly when he plays tennis or golf with his buddies, are you fucking kidding me? This is all just performative nonsense, dog and pony crap. Ultimately, look, if you're going to serve the people, you have to serve the people in what's best for them. So if you don't fully divest in the sectors that you're actively regulating, then you can't. You ultimately can't. And look, I'm not even upset with a lot of the decisions that Carney's made lately because they are benefiting financial interests and they are benefiting corporate interests, which is what you need to do in this country to correct course. The conservatives would have done a lot of the same things. However, he is doing it to his own benefit, right? That's really sort of the meat and potatoes of this argument, is that he's going to go into office worth X, and he's going to come out worth 3 times X because he controls his apparatus and all this money. I mean, look, he moves around $500 billion a year just in federal funding. It's like the idea of The idea that a man that has done what he's done already, now weaponizing that kind of money to his own benefit with policy and all these other tools that he has, yeah, of course. This guy's gonna be a multi-billionaire when he's done in office. And look, at the end of the day, it's our system that let this happen. We are to blame once again. Unfortunately, the people that make the rules are the ones that are in power, and they make them to benefit themselves. I like to look at Nancy Pelosi when I talk about these things because she's the best trader of all time. So you kind of look at that and you go, yeah, great. They built a system that works for themselves once again. Yeah. But in a perfect world, yes, they would have to fully divest from these sectors. In a perfect world, you'd get into public service. You would get paid significantly more than we pay our public servants. And you'd be held to a very high standard with high accountability and very, very harsh penalties for breaching the accountability, things that you're accountable for. I also think that if you built an incentive structure that increased their pay significantly based on performance, you would once again have a much better country. That's how you do this properly. Because then people don't go, well, I make fucking 100 times more out here in the private sector, and now I'm going to weaponize the system for my own benefit, right? Again, it comes down to a couple things: penalties, accountability. We don't pay them enough, and we need to rewrite the rules in a system, unfortunately, which is controlled by the people that are already doing the bad things.
Well, in the way I look at it is, the main issues here within Canada, say, everything that we talk about mainly boils down to issues of authoritarianism and corruption. And both of those, when that becomes like the governing ethos, that's the main function of government at this point, is just to corrupt and be authoritarian. Is those are inherently destabilizing. They don't work long term.
Right.
And this is the thing, is it goes, okay, we can do more and more of this until eventually the empire does fall and everything does crash down. Like even say, for instance, the Soviet Union which was one of the most powerful empires in all of human history, rivaled mainly only by America, fell on its own in 1991. And so that was done because it couldn't sustain itself. It was the model doesn't work. And so for us, I look at Canada, I go, okay, the change is going to happen at one point or another, like whether it continues going this way and it collapses in on itself, or whether we actually grow a backbone and start changing the proper direction. But tyranny can never last forever, or corruption on that front. So, I mean, there's, I think, too, the issue is that sometimes people get caught in the habit of going like, because I'll see this, what can we do about it? There's nothing we can do about it tomorrow or next week or a month from now. But over long term, generationally, all of this kind of stuff, things can actually change. But if you aren't willing to try to make those changes over a 10, 20, 30, 40 year period, like you and I doing this project, we're not trying to affect change right now because we objectively don't have that kind of influence.
You don't have that kind of leverage, yeah.
But hey, maybe in 10 to 20 years from now, we'll have enough influence to the point where when we expose what a certain politician is doing, it actually ends their career. And so, all right, play the long game.
Yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to. And that fits the narrative of macro. If you're gonna cover these topics and you want to see change, you have to think long term because they are big problems.
Anything else you want to add today?
That is everything.
All right. Before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week. It also has all of our sources for the topics discussed in this episode. That is blendrnews.com, BLENDR news.com. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.